The moment I walked through that front door, my entire life split in two. The before and the after. It was a Tuesday, not a Friday, not some dramatic anniversary date. Just a regular Tuesday in October, the kind where the sky is gray and the air smells like wet leaves, and you're thinking about nothing more complicated than what you're going to eat for dinner. I'd left work early because my manager had sent everyone home due to a water pipe issue in the building. I remember actually feeling good about it. A free afternoon. Maybe I'd watch some football. Maybe I'd take a nap. My biggest concern walking to my car was whether we had any of that leftover pasta from Sunday. I didn't call ahead. Why would I? It was my house. I should have called ahead. I heard it before I saw it. A rustling sound. That thick, crinkling noise that trash bags make when someone's stuffing them full. It was coming from upstairs from our bedroom. My first thought, genuinely, was that Sarah was doing some kind of deep clean. She did that sometimes when she was stressed. She'd reorganize closets, throw things out, scrub things that didn't need scrubbing. I even smiled a little while walking up the stairs. Figured she must have had a rough day, too. I pushed open the bedroom door. She was on her knees next to our bed, and there were 3 large black trash bags spread across the floor, all of them open, all of them filled. My dress shirts, my folded jeans, my gym clothes, my shoes, actual shoes, were sitting in a pile next to a half-filled bag like they were garbage. Like they were things that no longer belonged in this room. She didn't hear me at first. She was moving fast, focused, pulling things out of my drawer like she had a deadline. Her hair was pulled back, and she was wearing that gray hoodie she always wore when she was in a mood. There was nothing frantic about it. That's what got me. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was calm, methodical, like she'd done this before in her head 100 times and was finally just getting it done. I said her name. She spun around so fast she knocked one of the bags over, and for a second, just 1 second, her face did something I'd never seen it do before. Pure panic. Raw, exposed, deer-in-headlights panic. And then, just as fast, she rebuilt her expression into something harder. Something cold. "You're home early," she said. And I cannot explain. Not this isn't what it looks like. Just you're home early. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong by showing up in my own house. I asked her what she was doing. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Almost steady. She stood up, crossed her arms, and told me we needed to talk. Those things hadn't been working for a long time. That she'd been unhappy. That she thought it would be better if I found somewhere else to stay for a while. I want you to understand something. Sarah and I had been together for 9 years. Married for 6. We didn't have a volatile, dramatic marriage. We didn't scream at each other. We didn't throw dishes. I thought we were fine. Not fireworks every night fine, but real life fine. The kind of fine where you know each other's routines, and you finish each other's sentences, and you assume that if something was wrong, the other person would tell you. I hadn't been told anything. I stood there in the doorway of my own bedroom, looking at my life packed into trash bags, and I genuinely could not process what was happening. My brain kept trying to rewind, kept trying to find a moment I missed. The fight we didn't have. The conversation she never started. And then the doorbell rang. Sarah's face changed again. Different this time. Not panic, something more complicated. Something that looked almost like dread. She didn't move toward the door. She just stood there, looking at me, and I watched her jaw tighten. I turned around and walked back downstairs. And I opened the door. What I saw on the other side of that door didn't make sense at first. My brain genuinely refused to process it correctly, the way your eyes sometimes take a second to adjust when you walk from darkness in a bright light. It was a man, late 30s, maybe early 40s. Decent looking in that forgettable, average way. Dark jacket, jeans, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He was holding a coffee cup from the gas station down the street, and he had this expression on his face, relaxed, almost casual, like he was arriving somewhere he'd been before. Like he was arriving somewhere he was expected. He looked at me, and the casualness evaporated. His eyes flicked up to my face, and then quickly, instinctively, over my shoulder, toward the stairs, toward wherever Sarah was standing behind me. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a full minute. I knew. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need a timeline or a detailed explanation or any of the things people say they need in these moments. I knew the way you know when a bone is broken. Not because someone tells you, but because something inside you registers the wrongness of it immediately and completely. I stepped back from the door without saying a word and turned around. Sarah was at the bottom of the stairs now. She'd followed me down, and she was standing in the hallway with her arms still crossed and her face arranged into that careful, controlled expression she'd been wearing since I walked in. But her eyes were moving between me and the door, doing this rapid, nervous calculation, and I could see the version of this conversation she'd planned in her head falling apart in real time. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked back at him. Then I did something that surprised all three of us. I laughed. Not a humorous laugh. Not a this is funny laugh. The kind of laugh that comes out of you when the situation is so far beyond anything you prepared for that your body doesn't know what else to do with itself. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then it stopped, and I felt completely hollow afterward. I asked her how long. She said it didn't matter how long. I told her it mattered to me. She looked at the floor and said almost a year. Almost a year. I did the math automatically, the way your mind does things you didn't ask it to do. A year ago, we had gone to her sister's wedding in Nashville. A year ago, we had talked about maybe starting a family. A year ago, I had been completely, entirely, embarrassingly unaware that the person I had built my adult life around had been building something else entirely, with someone who was now standing in my doorway, holding a gas station coffee, and a bag that I was only just now realizing wasn't packed for a short visit. I asked her if she was planning to tell me at any point, or if she was just going to finish bagging my things and hand me a key and call it done. She said she was going to tell me tonight. Tonight, after the bags were packed, after the plan was already in motion, after the decision had already been made without me. I looked at the man in the doorway again. He had the decency, at least, to look uncomfortable. He wasn't meeting my eyes. He was studying the side of the door frame, like it held some kind of important information. I asked him to leave. He looked at Sarah. She gave him the smallest nod, and he backed off the porch without a word, and I heard his car start in the street a minute later. Then it was just us. I walked past her into the living room and sat down on the couch. The same couch we'd argued over buying because I thought it was too expensive and she'd wanted it anyway, and I'd eventually given in because I always eventually gave in, and I put my hands on my knees and I just sat there. She came and stood in the doorway between the hallway and the living room, and she started talking, explaining. The words came in this rehearsed, measured flow as she'd practiced them, and maybe she had. She talked about feeling disconnected, about feeling unseen, about how things between us had become routine and she hadn't known how to bring it up, and one thing had led to another, and she hadn't meant for it to go this far. I didn't interrupt her. I let her finish, and when she was done, when the rehearsed part ran out, and she was just standing there waiting for me to react, I asked her one question. I asked her whose name the mortgage was in. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there in that doorway, and I watched the question land on her like something physical. Her arms uncrossed. Her posture shifted. The carefully constructed calm she'd been wearing since I walked in started to develop cracks around the edges. The mortgage was in my name. Only my name. Because 3 years ago, when we bought this house, Sarah had been between jobs, and her credit score wasn't where it needed to be, and I had handled everything. Signed everything. Put my name on everything. Because that's what I did. That's what I always did. I handled things quietly and completely, and without making a production of it, because I thought that's what a good partner did. I thought that's what you did when you loved someone and you were building something together. I hadn't thought about it since. Not once. Not until this exact moment, sitting on that overpriced couch in the living room of a house that was legally and entirely mine. She said that didn't matter, that we were married and the house was a marital asset, and she knew her rights. I nodded slowly. I told her she was probably correct about that, and then I told her to go ahead and call a lawyer and find out exactly what those rights looked like because I intended to do the same thing first thing tomorrow morning. Something shifted in the room. I felt it more than saw it. Up until that moment, I think she had expected a particular version of this conversation. The version where I fell apart, where I begged, I got loud and emotional and gave her something to defend herself against. People who plan these things, and she had clearly planned this, prepare for the reaction they expect. They build their exit strategy around the assumption that you're going to behave a certain way. I wasn't behaving that way. I stood up from the couch, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing at the counter with my back to her, looking out the window at the neighbor's yard, at their dog wandering around near the fence, at the completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon continuing to exist outside while everything inside had been destroyed. When I turned back around, she was in the kitchen doorway, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not guilt exactly, not regret, something more like reassessment. I told her I was going to need her to give me some space for the rest of the evening. I told her I wasn't going to leave my own house, so if she needed space too, she was welcome to make whatever arrangements she needed to make. I said all of this in a voice that I barely recognized as mine, quiet, steady, almost formal. She left an hour later, packed a bag, a real bag, not a trash bag, and left without saying much else. The house was so quiet after that. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, not eating, not watching anything, not calling anyone, just sitting with it, just letting the full weight of what had happened settle into my body like something sinking to the bottom of still water. I thought about the year. I went back through in my mind the way you go back through a text conversation, looking for the message where things went wrong. I looked for the signs I'd missed, and the honest, humiliating truth was that there hadn't been many obvious ones. She'd been a little distant, maybe, a little more protective of her phone. There had been a few nights she'd come home later than usual with explanations that I now understood meant nothing. But nothing I would have looked at and thought something is wrong. Nothing that had ever made me suspicious, because I had never once, not for a single moment, considered the possibility that she was capable of this. That was the part that sat heaviest, not the betrayal itself, as devastating as it was, but the realization that I had fundamentally misunderstood the person I was married to. That the version of Sarah I thought I knew, the one I had trusted completely and built my life around, had apparently never fully existed. Or had existed once and disappeared so gradually that I hadn't noticed the disappearance. I called my brother that night. His name is Marcus, and he's 3 years older than me and the most level-headed person I know. I told him everything, from the trash bags to the man at the door to the mortgage conversation. He listened without interrupting, which is something Marcus does that I've always been grateful for. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he asked me one question. He asked me if I had any idea what she'd been doing with the joint account. I hadn't even thought about it. I opened my banking app right there on the kitchen counter, and what I found made the trash bags feel like a minor detail. Over the past 11 months, nearly $18,000 had moved out of our joint account in amounts small enough to avoid drawing attention. Never more than $400 at a time. Sometimes $200. Sometimes $150. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize, on dates spread out just irregularly enough that no pattern would jump out at a casual glance. And I had been a casual glance. I had never looked closely because I had never had a reason to look closely, and she had known that. She had counted on that. I sat at that kitchen counter for a long time, just staring at the screen. $18,000. That was the down payment we'd talked about putting toward a bigger place someday. That was the emergency fund I'd spent 3 years building from nothing. That was money I had earned and deposited and never once thought to guard because I believed, with complete sincerity, that we were on the same team. Marcus stayed on the phone with me. He told me not to touch anything in the account tonight. He told me to screenshot everything, every transaction, every date, every amount, and to send it to myself and to him. He told me to write down everything I could remember about the timeline when she'd started acting differently when I'd first noticed the phone thing. Anything. He said documentation was going to matter. He'd been through a bad divorce with a friend of his a few years back, and he'd watched that friend lose things he didn't have to lose because he'd been too emotional in the early days to think practically. I wasn't going to make that mistake. I spent the next 2 hours doing exactly what Marcus said. I screenshot every transaction. I went through my email and found every financial document I could locate, the mortgage paperwork, the insurance policies, and both of our car titles. I made a folder on my phone and put everything in it. Then I opened my laptop and started a document and wrote out the timeline as clearly as I could from memory. Every date, I could attach to something. Every conversation now meant something different in hindsight. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I was exhausted in a way that went deeper than tired. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Something I hadn't expected to feel this soon. It was small and quiet, and I almost didn't recognize it at first. It was clarity, not happiness, not relief, just clarity. The specific, almost cold feeling of knowing exactly where you stand and exactly what you need to do next. All the uncertainty that had existed in the background of my life, for however long things had been wrong without my knowing, all of that ambient, unnameable tension was gone, replaced by something that felt, surprisingly, like solid ground. I slept for a few hours. Not well, but enough. In the morning, I called a divorce attorney named Patricia Webb, whose name Marcus had given me from his friend's case. She had an opening that afternoon, and I took it. I brought my folder. I brought the timeline. I brought the bank records. Patricia was a small, precise woman in her 50s who asked clear questions and didn't react emotionally to anything I told her, which was exactly what I needed. She explained my options. She explained what the financial transfers could mean for the settlement proceedings. She used words like dissipation of marital assets and told me that 11 months of documented withdrawals to an outside account made during the period of the affair was the kind of thing that tended to matter to judges. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in almost 24 hours. I felt like I was going to be okay. Sarah reached out that evening. A text first, then a call I let go to voicemail. The text said she wanted to talk, that she thought they could handle things civilly, that she hoped I wasn't going to make this harder than it needed to be. I read it twice and put my phone face down on the table. The voicemail was more of the same, softer in tone, with an edge of something that might have been concern or might have been her recalibrating after realizing the conversation about the mortgage had not gone the way she'd expected. I didn't respond that night. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing yet, was that Patricia had already sent a letter. The joint account had already been flagged, that the process had already begun quietly and completely, the same way I had always handled things. Without announcement, without drama, without giving anyone the opportunity to prepare a countermove before the first move was already made. She had spent 11 months planning her exit. She had packed my clothes into trash bags. She had invited someone else into the life we had built together before she'd even had the decency to end it. She had assumed she knew how I would react. She had built everything around that assumption. She was wrong. The divorce took 7 months. I won't pretend it was clean or painless, because it wasn't. There were difficult days. There were nights where the quiet of the house felt less like clarity and more like emptiness, and I'd find myself sitting in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, drinking coffee I didn't need, turning the same memories over and over like stones in my hand. 9 years is a long time. You don't just close a door on 9 years and walk away clean. You carry pieces of it whether you want to or not. But I never wavered. Not once. Patricia was as good as Marcus had promised. The documentation I'd put together that first night turned out to matter significantly. The $18,000 in transfers became a central point in the proceedings. Sarah's attorney tried to reframe it, called it personal spending, called it incidental, tried to make it sound like the kind of thing that happens in any marriage where finances aren't perfectly coordinated. Patricia dismantled that argument with the patience and precision of someone who had done it many times before. 11 months of consistent transfers to an external account, timed across the documented period of the affair, told a very specific story. The kind of story a judge could follow without difficulty. Sarah didn't get the house. I want to be careful about how I say that, because I'm not telling you this as a victory lap. I'm telling you because of what it represented. That house was the thing she had counted on. It was the foundation of whatever plan she and the man with the duffel bag had been building together. I don't know all the details of what they discussed or what they'd imagined the future looked like. But I know that losing the house was the moment the full weight of the consequences landed on her. I could tell because of the phone call I received the night after that particular ruling. She called 3 times. I answered the third. Her voice was different. Not the cold, controlled tone from that Tuesday in October. Not the rehearsed explanation she delivered in the living room. This was something rawer. She said she hadn't expected things to go this way. She said she thought we could have been adults about it. She said, and I remember this precisely because it stunned me enough that I wrote it down after we hung up. She said she thought I would have moved on by now. Moved on. 7 months after finding my clothes in trash bags. 7 months after discovering 11 months of financial betrayal. She had expected me to have moved on. I told her I had moved on. That moving on and rolling over weren't the same thing. And then I told her I wished her well and meant it. As much as a person can mean something like that under those circumstances, and I ended the call. I haven't spoken to her since. The man with the duffel bag. I eventually learned his name was Derek, which felt aggressively ordinary for someone who had blown up my life. It lasted another 4 months after the divorce was finalized before she stopped mentioning him to mutual friends. I don't know the details, and I didn't seek them out. That chapter wasn't mine anymore. What was mine was everything that came after. I stayed in the house for another year and then sold it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to take something she had tried to use against me and turn it into something that served my future instead. I used the proceeds to put a down payment on a smaller place across town, something that was mine in every sense, with no history attached to it, no memories embedded in the walls. I painted every room a different color just because I could. I'd be lying if I said I didn't grieve the marriage. I did. I grieved the version of the future I thought I was building. I grieved the companionship and the routine, and even the ordinary Tuesday evenings that, looking back, hadn't been as hollow as she'd apparently found them. Grief is honest. It doesn't mean you made the wrong choices going forward. It just means something real was lost, even if what was lost turned out to be built on a foundation you didn't know was hollow. But here's what I know now, standing on the other side of all of it. I know that the moment I walked through that door and found those trash bags, I had a choice about who I was going to be in response to it. I could have collapsed. I could have begged. I could have let the shock and the hurt make my decisions for me. A lot of people do, and I don't judge them for it. Betrayal does something to your nervous system that's almost impossible to explain until you've felt it. But I made a different choice. I sat down on that couch, and I breathed, and I thought about the mortgage. I called my brother. I opened the banking app. I took the folder to Patricia's office. I handled it the way I had always handled things, quietly, completely, and without making a production of it. And the difference this time was that I was handling it for myself. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't let someone else's worst decision become your worst moment. That you held yourself together when everything was designed to make you fall apart. That you were, in the end, exactly who you needed to be, not for her, not to prove anything to anyone, but just because that's who you are when it matters most. I think about that Tuesday sometimes. The wet leaf smell of the October air. The sound of trash bags crinkling upstairs. The doorbell was ringing at exactly the wrong moment. And I think about how the thing that was supposed to be the ending turned out to be the beginning of something I hadn't known I needed. A life that was entirely, uncomplicatedly mine. That's the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you when you're in the middle of it. It doesn't just take things away. If you handle it right, if you hold yourself steady and think clearly and refuse to let someone else's choices define your response, it shows you exactly what you're made of. Turns out, I was made of more than she ever gave me credit for. And that was the most important thing I learned from the whole painful, clarifying, ultimately freeing experience of watching my wife pack my clothes into trash bags on a Tuesday afternoon in October. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've sat in your own quiet kitchen at 2 in the morning turning memories over in your hands, then you already know what I mean. And you probably already know, somewhere underneath the hurt, that you're going to be okay too. Subscribe to Deception Diaries for more true-to-life stories about betrayal, hidden truths, and the kind of unexpected justice that doesn't announce itself until it's already done.